Hello, here we are. Hello, everyone from St. John's, Newfoundland and Labrador. My name is Janet Herron, and I am an Alumni Engagement Officer with Memorial and your host for today's event. And I hope you're all well and safe as we live through and move forward through these very strange days. I'm here with Dr. Dianne Ford for Managing Stress for You and Your Team, the third in Memorial's Alumni Engagement Office's Leadership Series, which we are presenting in partnership with the Gardner Center and is supported by Johnson's Insurance. We will begin today's event with a land acknowledgement.
We respectfully acknowledge the territory in which Memorial St. John's campus is situated as the ancestral homelands of the Beothuk, and the island of Newfoundland as the ancestral homelands of the Mi'kmaq and Beothuk. We would also like to recognise the Inuit of Nunatsiavut and Nunatuhavut and the Innu of Nitassinan and their ancestors as the original people of Labrador. We strive for respectful relationships with all of the peoples of this province as we search for collective healing and true reconciliation and honour this beautiful land together. Please also recognise the peoples and their ancestors whose ancestral homelands are those on which your own institutions are situated.
Okay, that was Dr. Neil Bowes with the land acknowledgement. At the Office of Alumni Engagement, we are focusing on offering many ways for you to connect with Memorial from anywhere in the world. And we're working diligently to create opportunities to celebrate, socialize, mentor, learn, and advance both your career and improve your life. Embarking on new and exciting ways to build relationships is vital to our evolution as an institution. You, our alumni and friends, are our greatest ambassadors. You are a worldwide community of professionals, leaders, and change makers who advance the reputation of our university, our province, and our world. Please consider getting involved with our programming. There are mentoring opportunities with 10,000 coffees, occasions to meet up with NL expats through Global NL, and Coastlines, our online book club, features Newfoundland and Labrador authors who are also Memorial alumni. You can find out more details about all these initiatives on our website, www.mun.ca/alumni. Thank you for joining us for our event today. Managing Stress for You and Your Team is the third in our leadership series in partnership with the Gardner Center and supported by Johnson's Insurance. The Gardner Center is part of the Faculty of Business Administration at Memorial. They are an award-winning professional development hub that offers practical certificate programs and courses in a variety of business, leadership, and organizational topics. With the onset of COVID-19, the Gardner Center has moved all training online, which can now be accessed worldwide. Being well known for practical professional development, the Gardner Center has worked hard to maintain a high level of interactivity and engagement in the virtual classroom. I encourage you to check them out. I'll also be monitoring the Q&A function that you see on your screen. So if you'd like to ask a question of Dr. Ford, please type it in there. Dr. Ford will be answering as many questions as possible after her presentation. An important note about submitting questions using the Q&A function, you have to try to keep your question short, under 250 characters if possible. We're also recording this session and it will be available on the Alumni Engagement website following this event. Now, it is my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Dianne Ford. Dr. Ford is a full professor at the Faculty of Business Administration here at Memorial University. She holds a BA degree in psychology and an MBA degree from the University of Saskatchewan. She also holds a PhD in management from the School of Business at Queen's University. Since 2007, Dr. Ford has been teaching in Memorial's business undergraduate and graduate classes. Dr. Ford has experience as a private consultant in healthcare and education services. in Saskatchewan and Ontario in various nonprofit organizations in Ontario, and has served as president and vice president for not-for-profit volunteer organizations in both Saskatchewan and Newfoundland. She has spent time consulting and researching in the manufacturing industry, and she publishes and conducts research in knowledge management, workplace harassment, incivility, and the implications for job engagement, health and wellness, and workplace attitudes. Dr. Ford has been teaching at the Gardner Center since the fall of 2015, and she provides workshops on topics such as workload management, preventing workplace harassment, and managing workplace stress. And now I would like to turn the presenter duties over to Dr. Ford. I'm just going to load up her presentation, so just give me 1 second, and we will do that. And you are now the presenter, and I'm going to mute my volume, and I'm going to get rid of my video.
Thanks, Janet. Welcome, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here to speak to you about managing stress for teams. Before we get into talking about how to manage it, we do first need to talk about what is stress. So the formal definition of stress is that it is a psychological reaction to the demands inherent in a stressor that has a potential to make a person feel tense or anxious. So there's two main components here to stress that we need to understand. One is the psychological component, which is the assessment of something, an event or something or someone, as a threat or a challenge that is something that we need to address. And then there's also the physiological response, which leads to a feeling of tension in the muscles. There's also the increased heart rate and also the moving of blood from the digestion organs into the muscles and preparing the person to respond to the stressor. It does differ between people. And I have a picture here of a bear because for me, I'm from Saskatchewan originally. I used to camp up north where there's a lot of bears. And so if I were to see a bear, it's a stressor for me. I would have a stress reaction and I would view it as a threat. Whereas I have a friend who used to work as a park ranger and he would not be threatened or stressed around bears. He just said that they were pigs with fur. So we are two people. It's the exact same scenario of a bear in our presence, but one would have a stress response and the other doesn't. So when we talk about workplace stress, we need to understand that an individual may find something stressful even though you personally don't. So there are also two types of stress that people can experience. One is called a eustress. This is where it's something positive, like getting a new job or buying a new home or marrying somebody or getting a new family member. These are all things that the body needs to adjust to and is a stressor. However, we see it as a positive thing and we welcome it into our life. So I'm not going to focus about the positive stressors. I'm going to focus on them when we see it as a hindrance, when it's a barrier, when it's something that is going to harm us. That is distress, and that's the negative stress. So when we move forward here, why do we need to consider why is stress important for society? There's lots of statistics and research looking at the implications from an organizational perspective about stress. So for example, in Canada, 41% of employees noted feeling often or always stressed. That was back in 2002. In addition, there's been research that shows that about $33 billion a year is lost in productivity, and considerably more than that when we consider medical costs associated with stress. In 2018, it was estimated that an employer, any employer, is losing approximately $1,000 per employee per year due to financial stress for the employees alone. So we do know that there are these indirect costs that employers are covering because of stress that their employees are experiencing. So as an employer, it actually benefits us to invest some money and time into managing employee stress so that we're not leaking money out the back door, basically. In Newfoundland here, Statistics Canada has looked at looking at how stressed people are. In 2010, it was deemed that 22% of the males, 24.9% of females ages 15 and older reported experiencing quite a lot of extreme stress most days of their lives. They subsequently changed the statistics on this, so we can't compare them necessarily across the years. But in 2016, they said, oh, how many 12 and older are experiencing quite a lot or extreme stress most days. And the count was 59,600 in 2016, and that increased to 68,600 in 2017. I was unable to find statistics for 2019 or 2020 to give us more updated numbers there. However, individuals who report feeling stressed in their jobs are 25% more likely to quit and 25% more likely to miss days of work. And this is where some of those costs come into employers, because turnover costs can be quite costly, and missing work, absenteeism, impacts our productivity as an organization. In addition to all of that past research, we also know that the pandemic, COVID-19 pandemic, and the public health measures are having impact on employee stress. For example, there is a measure called the Holmes Raw Life Stress Inventory. And this is a list of life events that can happen to a person. And if it happened to you within the past 12 months, you would circle the score associated with that life event. And going through that life inventory, I've looked at what are the typical impacts that people have been experiencing because of the pandemic. And what I found was that individuals are already being popped up into what's called moderate risk. So there's low risk, which is 20% chance of having a major injury or major illness in the next 2 years. Moderate risk is where you're at 50% chance of major injury or illness in the next 2 years. And then there's high risk, which is 80% chance of major injury or illness in the next 2 years. So things like changing of work arrangements. So this move to required remote work, living arrangements, work responsibilities. So adding in the PPEs and contact tracing and those kinds of nuances are changing what people are doing. Revisions of personal habits, so major changes in sleeping habits or eating habits. And this could be positive changes or negative changes as this inventory. It doesn't really matter for this inventory. It could be positive changes or negative changes. Major changes in recreational habits, church activities, social activities, family get-togethers. So when we look at this, these incidents, these events add up the score to put somebody into moderate risk. Or the pandemic may also have these similar effects of death of a spouse or a family member, major illness, major change in health or behavior of a family member, or being fired at work. So the addition of those ones on top of the other ones lead the risk to 80%. So we need to be aware of this as employers or supervisors or as leaders in organizations, because this is in addition to normal life. And so we need to be aware that our employees are at higher risk for injury and illness because of this pandemic. So moving forward, I want to talk about Saley's general adaptation theory. This talks about how the body responds to stress. And this explains why we're at a higher risk for illness down the road. So the chart here, the up and down, the vertical axis is your level of operating and level of health. So higher means able to do more, lower means you're feeling ill, right? And the x-axis, the horizontal line, is cutting at normal level of functioning. And it goes across time, all right? So what happens here is at the very start, it's as if I were to, for example, go camping and I then see a bear. So this is what my body would go through. It would go through what's called the alarm phase. During the alarm phase, my body is preparing itself to respond to the stressor of the bear. So my heart rate would increase, my palms would start getting sweaty, my blood would start moving from the digestion and reproductive system and pushing out into the muscles so that I could fight, flight, or freeze if I need to, right? Then we go into the resistance phase. This is where we're dealing with the stressor. So this is me running really fast to my car or to a building, okay? Maybe not the best method for dealing with bears, but this is my resistance phase. So I can run faster than I normally can run. Similarly, in the workplace, People are able to focus better. They're able to work harder, work longer hours than normal. That's the superhuman power of the resistance phase. You're able to operate at a higher level. But the superhuman powers don't come for free. So once we have gotten it safe, that stressor is removed, then our body goes through what's called the exhaustion phase. So we don't just go back to normal, we actually have to pay the piper a little bit. And this is where we dip below normal functioning. So if I were into a building and I'm now safe from the bear, my body would now start having some of the shakes. I would start feeling a bit nauseous to the belly. I might be feeling fuzzy to the head. But these symptoms that prevent me from operating at normal level eventually wane off, and then I would have my recovery back to normal. So this is just for the illustration of a bear, but let's take it to a more significant stressor that occurs for a much longer period of time. So the bigger the stressor and the longer the stressor is in one's life, the deeper we go into exhaustion. And that exhaustion can then take on the form of a major injury or illness. So for example, elderly individuals who lose their life partner, typically 6 months down the road, may have a major health incident themselves, such as a stroke or a heart attack. This is why the exhaustion goes deeper the longer and higher our resistance phase is. So what are the types of stressors? How can we manage it if we don't know what it is? So let's talk about what are the typical stressors. For Newfoundland, the number one stressor for individuals, for adults, is work. The number two stressor is financial concerns. Number three is family. Number four is health. And number five is time pressures. That was from Statistics Canada in 2019. The research field in terms of stress management basically looks at four types of stressor categories. The first one being time stressors, that we only have 24 hours in a day on average, and that when you take into consideration the amount of time you need for sleep, eating, hygiene, exercise, and social factors, and then add on their work, we start running out of time quite quickly, right? And so people who feel time stressors will feel a lot of stress throughout the day, and it's because the time is leaking out. They just don't get enough time in the day to do what they want. Number two is encounter stressors. This is where you experience stress because you're interacting with people. So it can be anything as benign as good workplace conflict, right? Where we are debating issues. Some people may find that stressful. It also includes things like workplace incivility, rudeness. Rudeness is actually a major stressor for many people. Harassment, bullying, ostracism. Those are more severe forms of encounter stressors, but they are indeed a stressor and a strain on individuals. Then we have situational stressors. These are your working conditions. So things like, how well is your ergonomic setup? Is it leading to physiological strain on the body and the stress in that? What are the sound levels, the smell, the air quality? Things also include hazards within the workplace. So if you work in construction on the road, it's not just your work environment and the weather, which is also a situational stressor, but also the traffic is a situational stressor. Then we have fourth is the anticipatory stressor. So this is the invisible stressor of worry and fear and unpleasant expectations of the future. So each of these have little nuances that we can use for management tactics. So in stress management, we have three main categories of management techniques. All three are really important, and all three should be developed by employees for them to have the best effect in the workplace. I typically find that employees may have really good reactive strategies, but poor inactive strategies, or they may have really good inactive strategies and poor reactive strategies. And I'm going to talk about why in a bit. So let's talk about reactive strategies. So reactive strategies is a short-term coping technique. It is the person is in resistance. They are experiencing stress here and now, and it is simply meant to use as a release of some of that strain and tension. So it makes us feel better here and now. There's a lot of different techniques, and you can Google a whole bunch of them. Things like visualization, going to your happy space, right? The mind is interesting in that it doesn't know the difference between reality and thought. So the more senses you can use in your visualization, the body can go, oh, we're not in the forest and the bear chasing us. We're actually on the beach having a nice mojito. Like the visualization can trick the body into relaxing. Mindfulness is growing in terms of its research and is a way to bring the person out of the past or future and bring them here into the present moment, and uses a form of curiosity, in essence, to help release judgment and worry and stress. Anticipatory stressors can also use rehearsal. So practice, role play. Reframing is another technique that can be helpful to reduce stress. So for example, if I'm faced with a bear, I could say, oh, it's a pig with fur, and try to focus on how it's just a pig with fur and I just need to leave it alone, it'll be fine. Or for example, in 2015, when my house flooded, it was basically, okay, instead of worrying about, oh, we have to move, we have to go through all this process, we have to rebuild the house, this is an opportunity to make the house something that I love, right? To fix the things that irritated me before, now it's an opportunity. Muscle relaxation is another short-term coping strategy to help reduce the muscle tension that the body will carry in stress. So this includes things like massage therapy or self-massage using massage balls, or also directed massage release where you focus on releasing the tensions in the body. Another technique, which is one that I teach all of my students from undergraduate to PhD, are breathing techniques. So I'm going to talk about breathing techniques here, a specific one, which is square breathing. So what breathing techniques do is that they help the body release some of the physiological signs of stress. When people get really anxious and stressed, they alter their breathing patterns, which can lead to a lot of physiological symptoms that make it worse. Also, so what happens with the deep breathing, and the deep breathing needs to go down into the belly, not the ribs or up into the shoulders. By going down deep into the belly, you're moving your diaphragm. And what's happening with that type of breathing is that you are activating your vagus nerve. The vagus nerve is the largest nerve in your body. And when it's activated, it actually promotes the parasympathetic system. The parasympathetic system is a fancy word for saying calm. It helps down-regulate your body into a more calm and relaxed state. So what happens then is with the square breathing, what we are doing is we are focusing and creating this image of breathing in for a count of 4, holding for a count of 4, exhaling for a count of 4, and holding for a count of 4, and then repeating over and over and over again. All of these components of this square breathing physiologically helps with the oxygenation and helps stimulate the vagus nerve. The other factor that I love about the square breathing is that to do it, you have to think about counting and the square and directing what you're doing. So it helps distract the brain from going either to the past or the future or whatever that was stressing you out. It distracts the mind. So this is a fantastic technique to integrate, and it's super easy. No one knows that you're doing it unless you tell them that you're doing it. Proactive stress management, these are for the mid-term range of benefits. Basically, what proactive stress management does is it prepares your mind and your body to deal with stress should you be faced with it in the future. So it helps protect you. So the various techniques are to look at physiological resiliency. So that includes getting good sleep, getting a good amount of sleep, 8 to 10 hours, right? Smoking cessation. There's some really interesting research about stress and smoking, and people who quit smoking report experiencing less stress than when they were smoking. Reducing alcohol consumption because it impacts one's sleep, and eating balanced diet and physical activity. Those are really important for helping your physiological resiliency. There's also psychological resiliency, so the cognitive side. So creating a sense of hardiness, which is, do you believe that you have a sense of control of yourself and how you are going to deal with things? Having a sense of commitment to the task or the job, and having persistence to overcome the challenges. Another psychological resiliency is gratitude. And again, there's some interesting research looking at the impacts of gratitude on experiences of stress. So it's a good practice to pick up or look into. Finally, we have social resiliency. And this is one that's really important. This is your circle of family and friends, and they're your confidence and your cheerleaders. They're the ones that help buffer stress. So if people are too busy working and not able to spend time building and maintaining those relationships, when they do experience severe stress, then they have fewer resources available to help them handle it. So social resiliency is really important. So the final one is inactive strategies, and this one's for long term. And what inactive strategies do is they actually remove the stressors. So you never feel stressed in the first place. So it helps prevent stressors from entering your life. So the techniques for inactive strategies are linked to the types of stressors. So for example, the time stressor, you need to learn how to use time management, both effective time management and efficient time management. For encounter stressors, we need to develop emotional intelligence. Also interpersonal communication skills, team building, improve organizational justice, and leadership training are really important for encounter. Situational, this is where organizations need to do a full assessment and identify what are the environmental stressors. Some you will not be able to control. So for example, deep sea fishing, you cannot control the ocean, right? There are going to be some environmental stressors that are persistent regardless of managerial interventions. But there are a lot in terms of ergonomics and design that we can tackle if we look for them. And then anticipatory. A good inactive strategy for anticipatory stressors is using goal setting and what's called small wins, where you break down the big things into teeny tiny steps that you know you can achieve. So in terms of the wrap up here, I do have 7 ideas that you can help to as a team leader or as a supervisor or organizational employer, you can implement these to help remove and reduce stressors, but also to help promote resiliency. So the first one here, and I will provide these in the follow-up email, so you don't need to worry about writing these down as quickly as I go through them. But the first one is pay employees as well as you can, provide as much employment security as you can, and include insurance benefits. So this is a big ticket item on the budget for organizations, but the implication for financial stress on employees ultimately help with the number 2 stressor for Newfoundlanders and comes back in terms of reduced losses in turnover and also absenteeism and effects of stress if that's the source of concern. Also, you can, number 2 is follow up occupational health and safety legislation, including preventing workplace harassment and bullying. So occupational health and safety legislation deals with situational stressors, but preventing workplace harassment and bullying also helps remove and counter stressors. Number 3 is promoting and supporting boundaries between work and personal life. This one is really important. Healthy employees are productive employees, and people who have healthy personal lives tend to have more productivity in the workplace because there's less spillover of the stress from their personal lives into the workplace. So, for example, Germany actually has legal requirements that there cannot be any work in a person's life for a certain amount of hours, consecutive hours in their day, and in the 24-hour period. It helps promote healthy sleeping habits, and you can also help to reduce off hours work communications like emails, which can be stressors for your employees. Number 4 is provide training for interpersonal skills, things like emotional intelligence, communication, conflict management. These help remove the encounter and anticipatory stressors for employees. Provide leadership training to prevent abusive supervision and toxic work environment. This is a big gap for organizations. If you do not provide leadership training, people learn how to lead by mimicking their previous supervisors and how their family dynamics work. So if you want to ensure that people are not bringing in aversive tactics, such as yelling at or belittling or embarrassing their employees as a way to motivate them, you need to provide them with appropriate training so they know how to motivate people in a healthy way. You also want to provide training and mentorship for time management to remove time stressors. And number 7 is, again, to provide employee assistance programs for financial planning and counseling for work and family and personal matters. This helps promote coping, but also helps in removal of all forms of stressors. So with that completed, I am going to move us over to the Q&A session. And Janet, would you like to join me now?
I would love to join you now. Hold on. Here's my video. I'm coming back, and I'm going to, hold on, I have to take the ball back from you. I'm going to become the presenter again. We do have a couple of questions already, so just give me a second. I'm going to pop up our little Q&A picture, and I am going to, no, I'm not going to do that. Sorry. Okay. Yes, thank you so much, Dianne. That was Dr. Ford. That was really, really interesting. And it really does show, that inventory in particular really does show how much stress, you just extrapolate that, how much stress everybody is under.
Yeah.
So our first question is from Susan Park, and she would like to know, how would you approach an employee who has been at a high level of stress for a long period of time since COVID began? They try to take a day to relax, but you can see the cracks.
Yeah, this is a very important and real issue, and it requires gentleness. So what I would recommend is having a conversation with them and empathize with them that you are noticing that they're having, I wouldn't say difficulties with this, but saying that this is a difficult time and that you are concerned for their well-being. Highlight the employee assistance program and reiterate that they are a strong person, right? No one wants to think that they are weak or are not meeting the grade. So the way you want to frame this is that they are a valued employee, that they are strong, that they have been very capable in handling this so far, and you would like to provide them with additional tools and help so that they continue for their own health. So this is something that I would recommend sending to a counselor or qualified psychologist or social worker or EAP worker. Managers, we don't have the skills for this type of counseling, but to have that initial conversation, say that you value them, you've noticed that it seems that they're having some difficulties, that, and reiterate that they're valued and strong, and that this is an additional tool to help them, which is normal. It also helps if you yourself are doing this as well, that you are seeking out EAP, because those who do it make it easier for others because they're modeling this as a behavior.
Mm-hmm.
Excellent question.
Yes, excellent question. Genevieve Dennis would like to know, how can this translate to helping employees working through clinical depression or high anxiety?
Okay. So clinical depression and high anxiety, those are significant health issues and mental health issues. Again, we are not qualified as managers or leaders or supervisors to provide counseling, but we can certainly open the door for communications and say, what do you need? There are, again, the individual types of supports that an individual needs is going to be individualized because stress is individual. Anxiety and triggers for anxiety are individual. So identifying what are those triggers and having conversations about what accommodations can be made to help reduce those triggers or reduce or provide them with opportunities to manage the resulting anxiety. So maybe they need to take a 10-minute walk outside to decompress. Maybe they need a quiet space where they can go and do some breathing without noise or visual stimulation, or again, that trigger. But again, it's not up to management to cure them, but it is management's responsibility to support and accommodate and help them. So I would suggest that as well. Yeah.
What tools and support can we offer staff while we are remote during the resistance and exhaustion phase through fiscal year-end rush? That's Stein Kruger's asking that question. Sorry.
Gotcha. Okay. So there are going to be times in the work season, fiscal year ends are a big crunch time for sure, that the workload actually bumps up, right? And they might be, if they're working remotely, you don't have that face-to-face time, or you can't provide donuts or drinks or yoga time in person to assist them with that. What you can do is really promote the sleep, because here's the thing, with chronic sleep deprivation, people are not able to do as much. It takes them longer to do the work than if they're not sleep deprived. So during crunch times, sleep becomes much more critical. So you can promote more sleep, and you can also ask them how they're doing, right? Again, it might look like the workload's a crazy thing, but maybe for that person, it's a fantastic challenge and they're in their zone and they're super happy, where somebody else might be into a meltdown, right? Yeah. So having those individual conversations and will help, and promoting sleep. I should have a talk just about sleep, but yeah, that will help.
It's so important, sleep. Here's a question from Elise Morin. She says, hello, I've been looking into the work of Dr. Peter Levine on somatic experiencing with things like bullying in the workplace, which can turn into trauma in the workplace. Can a manager use some of Dr. Levine's techniques to help the employee at least voice or communicate what happened in the bullying interaction?
Yeah, I'm not overly familiar with Dr. Levine's work, and I am very hesitant to say to anyone that a manager should take on counseling role, especially when we're talking about trauma. If you suspect that there is workplace bullying going on, you need to initiate that conversation with the individual and get them in line with qualified assistance. So that's in the form of a counselor, or even the internal at arms harassment officer would be a good starting point too. If you aren't fully trained as a counselor or psychologist, I think doing these types of techniques would be pushing a limit. Yeah.
Okay. Wise words. Catherine Lawton has a great question. I have been strongly encouraging staff to take annual leave, but where everyone has been working from home, few people really have taken what I think would be a sufficient leave. I am also guilty of this herself. I'd be curious to see the statistics on annual leave use this past year and any links between this and stress.
Huge. Yeah, absolutely. And I'm also guilty of it, right? I have not taken vacation time in over 12 months. And one of the challenges is that oftentimes when we take vacation time, we think about traveling away, right? And so with travel restrictions, people aren't thinking of trips that they would normally plan to take vacation time for, but that time off is really important for decompression and for resetting, and creating that work-life balance in some way. So I agree. I don't think people are using it like they should be. And I think it is a contributing factor for some of the burnout people are starting to experience with the pandemic. Remote work is an interesting challenge because remote work allows for more flexibility for balancing home life and work life, but it also blurs the boundaries between work life and home life. And so people aren't necessarily cutting the work ties as cleanly as they would if they were heading into the office and then heading home. So as an employer, I agree. I think you should be promoting vacation time and saying, hey, stay at home vacation or a staycation. Like how can we do this in Newfoundland? And I want you taking your 2 weeks or your 4 weeks or your 6 weeks, whatever it is your organization provides. It is, yeah, definitely something that we can prompt and promote in our organizations for health and wellness. Yeah, great question. Thank you.
Kim Blanchard, she is saying healthy people are productive people. Absolutely.
Yes.
You have suggestions for teams to support their management. For example, when the person is struggling is management and the team is lacking leadership.
It is an interesting issue because there's, one of the areas that I've been starting to look into is incivility directed at leaders. So it is an interesting issue that leaders and team leaders seem to carry the brunt of the load, and they may be less likely to ask for assistance or have those counseling, the informal chats that give us that social resiliency for dealing with stress with their followers, right? But what is important is that they do find a peer that they can actually have those conversations with. So within an organization, they might not engage in that with their team members, but they should have peers that they can actually have that communication with. In terms of team development and team effectiveness, there's an actual interesting factor that effective teams share leadership roles. Now, there may be the official team leader that does the overseeing of the project management, et cetera, but there can also be somebody who is the socio-emotional, the relational leader, right? In terms of how are we all doing, the social leader, et cetera. So we can share roles that way, but depending on your organizational culture, the team leader might not feel that them getting counseling or support nurturing wise from a team might be available to them. But in that case, in the organization, you need to go and set up peers, right? Other team leaders for support. I hope that answers your question. So it kind of depends on your organizational culture. Having peers definitely would help. But if you have a kind of a nurturing kind of culture to begin with, they may be able to do that within the teams. Yeah.
Here's a question. Do both personal and professional stress have the same impact, or do they show differently on the employee?
Oh, physiologically, it's the same. Psychologically, it may differ. The impacts of the stress may lead to, for example, professional stress may lead to professional burnout, which may lead to career changes, that kind of thing, of leave from work. Personal stressors still have the same physiological impact, and it can bleed into the work realm, just like workplace stress can bleed into the personal realm. So in terms of physiological health, no, there's no difference. In terms of what are the consequences to it, it varies between professional stress and personal stress, right? So personal stress, you may see it come out in terms of burning bridges with relationships. You may see it in terms of maladaptive coping strategies like drinking or alcohol. You may see it in terms of health. But then professional stress, you may see some of those similar coping strategies, but you may also see impact on career commitment, organizational commitment, and turnover.
Here's a question from Susan Park. We have a small group going through a very stressful time. How would you suggest we help the group while in this situation? Once they are through the situation, how would you approach the group to help them?
Okay, it's a bit vague to figure out. So what I would look at is what are the stressors that are going through? Like, is it pandemic stress, which is situational, right? Or is it time stressors or associated with workload? So depending on where the form of stress is coming, the tactics can vary in that regard. You can certainly encourage all of those coping strategies of visualization, mindfulness, muscle relaxation. So you can also promote, hey, go and have some massages. You can promote resiliency so that they can handle that over the term in terms of eating and exercising and getting out and walking. But in terms of fixing it, it depends on what the source is. So I'm not sure I'm answering your question very well on that one.
Here's another question. Is there a line between supporting and over supporting someone who is in resistance or recovery stages?
Ah. Um, that's a good question. So if it is, there is a risk for example, for anxiety that over supporting may lead to escalation of triggers and avoidance behaviors. On the flip side, when it comes down to stress, really coping in terms of providing that socio-emotional support, that social support, is important and necessary. So I'm of the mindset that where is the risk, right? If the risk is that you don't support enough and that person experiences even worse stress and worse health outcomes, then I'd rather, and versus if I over support them, it escalates down the road. I would rather support them now, because that's the risks right now for not providing sufficient support is greater than what might happen down the road, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, Jocelyn also mentions that, over supporting someone could also impact other staff members, because obviously not everyone's coming from the same place or doing the same job even.
Right, but and this gets into some organizational justice components and gets into the issues of confidentiality, right? So somebody might need these accommodations and genuinely require it, but and so that from a justice perspective is absolutely necessary, but you can't inform people about that because then that violates confidentiality. But there is a balance point there that you have a duty to accommodate, right? And as we said, not everyone's going to feel stressors the same way. So, maybe Bob has experienced stress today with this particular situation and we need to support Bob, but maybe Joanne is going to be experiencing it a different way with a different scenario. So we support her in that direction, right? So within an organization over time, are you treating people equally across time based on their needs?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. There can become a comparative effect, but when you come at it from we are a place that supports and meets a duty to accommodate, and we want you to do well, and if the person's doing well, excellent.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Here's a question from Kelly Butler. How do you reach an employee who appears unable to acknowledge and deal with obvious stress that others see them exhibiting?
Okay. Yeah, so that is a sensitive conversation to be had. If you don't have a good relationship to begin with, it makes it even harder. And so this is why things like leadership training, communication skills, conflict management, these are really critical skills for leaders to have, because when you get into these difficult conversations, you have to have that background. But if you have that history of having good communications, then it's easier to have that conversation and say, I'm concerned for you, right? Here's what I'm noticing, and you can list out behaviors, very specific behaviors that you are noticing that are to you concerning for their health and wellness. So coming at it from the perspective of, I'm on your side, I want you to be okay. We need, can we talk about this, and are you getting help? Do you want additional resources? Here's some resources that we have available to us to help you with this. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And maybe this is the final question, and this might be a bit of a follow-up, but how do we encourage these practices at work? How do we make more people aware of the resources that are available, the square breathing, all of that?
Yeah. So it's sort of like your safety 5 minutes, right? So some organizations say, here's a safety 5 minutes, and they'll, at the start of a meeting, they'll have, here's a latest safety tip. We can also incorporate, here's latest, our stress management 5 minutes, right? We can do email memos of saying, hey, this is what we have available. Reminder, we have EAP available. We can normalize this type of conversation, by bringing it into our regular conversations, into our regular meetings, communication format. So posters, when we're back at the office, there can be posters. You can have these in conversations. It's interesting because there's arguments that, leaders appear weak if they disclose that they are partaking in certain behaviors.
Mhm.
But when you look at it from a mental health perspective, and when you look at it as a mentoring and guiding behaviors, it actually helps the organization because others will mimic it. So if the leader is saying mental health is whatever, suck it up, deal with it, then people are really not going to disclose. People are not going to be practicing these behaviors, versus if the leader's saying, hey, you know what? Today I've done up my gratitude journal. This is what I've done. Here's a book that I found really interesting on the topic. I highly recommend it.
Mhm. Mhm.
So normalizing it, bringing it into conversation makes a difference. Some organizations also do yoga minutes or do a walk around the block sort of thing, like a lunch walk at the park or what have you. And those help. But if your organization has a culture of you must be in front of your computer 9 to 5, and you need to be busy during that time, you're working against the wellness component here. Because people cannot be productive 9 to 5 uninterrupted in front of their computers. They need to move. They need to have breaks. Yeah.
It's a big conversation. Well, I think we are, I think we're towards the end of our time now. So we're going to wrap things up. I'm going to thank Dr. Ford sincerely for such an enlightening and interesting presentation. And thank you to all of you for attending and for your wonderful questions. If you enjoyed today's event, our fourth and final in our leadership series is going to be held on April the 27th at 1 p.m. And that will feature Kara Arnold discussing how organizations can improve gender equity in leadership. So you can find the link to register for that on our alumni website. As I indicated earlier, this session has been recorded, and we will be sharing a link in an upcoming email to the recording, and also with some additional resources that Dr. Ford has very kindly put together for us, so we can learn more and more about dealing with stress, which we all need to do. And that's it. So thanks again, everyone, for attending. And I look forward to seeing people at our next event. And thank you again, Dr. Ford. And I hope everyone stays safe out there and keeps washing their hands.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.